It's been quite a while since we saw the original Golgo 13 game. In fact, it was episode 322, and it's been just a little bit more than 322 episodes since then. That game mixed a lot of genres in order to tell a cinematic action-adventure story. That game wasn't a big hit in Japan. It wasn't a flop, it just came out after the Famicom wave had crested, so Vic Tokai didn't have a sequel planned. And then something weird happened. Golgo 13 was released in the US right at the height of the NES boom. It sold a ton of copies in the US, and that spurred the creation of this sequel. But for some weird reason, they chose not to use Golgo 13 on the box or cartridge label for the NES version, so kids going out to buy a new game wouldn't have known it was a sequel. Golgo 13 was an extremely long-running comic series about Duke Togo, professional assassin. He was an international man of mystery, going on globe-trotting adventures throughout the Cold War. The comic was published almost continuously from the 1960s until its creator's death in 2021. The subtitle of the game in Japanese means Riddle of Icarus, and the story is told in some very lengthy cutscenes. You can skip them by hitting select, and you're probably going to want to do that after you've seen them once. For my hour-long recording session, about 10 minutes were cutscenes, and I only made it about 3/4 of the way through the game. The plot involves an SDI satellite that's been pulled from the sky and crashes to the Earth. A villainous organization is blackmailing both the US and the Soviets with this ability. And when the CIA and the KGB can't do it themselves, they turn to Duke Togo. This sends you on a globe-trotting adventure that ranges from Paris to Venice to the Orient Express and finally Afghanistan. The original game featured a ton of different playstyles, which the Riddle of Icarus tones down quite a bit, but not entirely. It's more that they no longer jump around between different playstyles quite so much. The majority of stages are side-scrolling action. You walk around, hit B to fire your gun, hit A to jump. Holding down A and pressing up will make you do a high jump, and if you're close to an enemy or are out of bullets, then you'll kick instead of fire your gun. A lot of the enemies that you face here will shoot something straight at you, but there are a few tricky ones. The explosion from the Grenadiers, for example, spread out a lot further than you might think. And the enemies with shotguns fire them in a few different angles, making dodging them pretty tricky. And when you get to Afghanistan, you'll also face wildlife along with human opponents. When you're confronted with a boss, Duke Togo puts away his guns and decides to fight them hand to hand. In these battles, B is kick, A is punch, and up will jump. The bosses tend to do a ton of damage, and it can be tough to get in between their attacks, but they're also prone to getting locked in place by your own repeated attacks. If you go into a building, you'll enter a first-person maze, and as you navigate these, you'll sometimes find enemies. Here, hitting the A button draws your gun, and then hitting the A button again fires. You'll have a crosshair that you can move around when your gun is out. You have to be pretty quick on the trigger in these segments. At one point, you have to make a fast getaway in a car. Here, A will accelerate, and B will throw a grenade. How do you slow down then? Well, you use the gear shift mainly. Use up and down to change among the car's 3 gears. That segment is timed, and it's really close. You'll also be called upon to snipe on rare occasions, and here you just move your scope around and then press A to fire. There aren't a lot of power-ups in this game. Basically, it's more bullets or health. They can drop from enemies as you wander around, or from guys in the maze. When they drop in the maze, you have to walk forward a step to collect it. You only have 1 life in Golgo 13, but you have infinite continues. And if you do have to walk away, there's a cheat code that you can use. You have to press and hold select as the act intro plays, and then on the second controller, alternate pressing A and B 8 times. That'll bring up this menu where you can skip to any level, although they're not in order. In Japan, Golgo 13 Riddle of Icarus seemed to be even less popular than the first Golgo 13 Famicom game. It seems to be more remembered for its license than any gameplay element. And of course, everybody disliked the 3D mazes. I can't really argue with that either. They're huge and constructed with loops to defeat the traditional keep your hand on the wall method. I have to say that the Riddle of Icarus does present a better, more coherent game than the first Golgo 13 game. And while segments can be tough, they're pretty far from impossible. I think if I kept recording for another 20 or 30 minutes, I probably would have been able to beat this one. I was kind of close to the end, and I was using maps of the mazes. I do think it does a good job presenting that action-adventure story that you'd want from a Golgo 13 game. You're confronting villains and avoiding death traps, having fights in dramatic locations, but the Riddle of Icarus suffers from the problem of not doing anything well. The side-scrolling action segments are fine. The driving segments are fine. The hand-to-hand combat with bosses is fine. The 3D mazes are... okay, well that one's not so good. My point is that Golgo 13, The Riddle of Icarus, doesn't manage to exceed the sum of its parts. It's made up of a bunch of stuff that's okay, and in the end, it's just an okay game.